and welcome to Convin Conversations. I'm your host, Ashish, CEO of Convin, a conversation intelligence platform for contact center setups. In today's episode of Convin Conversation, we have Jim Liu with us. Jim, the Chief Customer Officer for Etech Global Services. He's also an author. We can call him a CX visionary, definitely, and the ICMI Top 25 CX and Contact Center thought leader. Jim specifically specializes in speech analytics and then quality monitoring, customer experience, learning about the AI, all of those things are his expertise. Welcome to Convin Conversations, Jim. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to today's discussions.
Sure. In today's episode, Jim will be talking about how is AI driving quality management transformation in contact centers, right? So you have two large pieces. One is your own current state of quality management that happens in the contact centers, and then how is AI really impacting it. Before we really dive into that topic, I always love to ask my guests about how their journey has been, how did they reach to this position that they are at currently, so our audience can really relate a lot more. If you can really give us some brief about how has been your journey so far, how did you reach here, would be great.
Sure. So, Ashish, believe it or not, I am an older person. I have grandkids and kids. And when I started my career, I was an agent, just like some of the listeners today. And
Okay.
I started on the phones, collecting information, and I really enjoyed people, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really what started my career. From there, since I became an agent, I was obviously a leader, supervisor, manager, whatever you want to call them, throughout my journey. But I was born and bred in operations, saw all aspects of the business. Fortunately, in 2003, I moved to India and was managing contact center agents, and that's really where the vision started becoming more of a reality of how do you do things where people don't actually understand it. Because in 2003, contact center agents were fairly new in India.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how my career started. I've been in the business for over 30 years. I love what I do every day, and that's pretty much how it started.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So you talked about you starting in very early, probably 2003, probably before that as well, right? I'm sure you have seen ton of evolution, Jim, right? Just from the basics of when it was just about dialing the numbers to how things have changed a lot about everything else. Let's pick the specific part, which is quality management, which is a very important part as far as I understand on the contact center setup side. Uh, the first question would be, how do you rate the current state of quality monitoring across contact centers? Do you think it is up to the mark? Do you think it is lagging somewhere? So on a scale of 10, like a very upfront number, what would that be from your side?
Yeah, so the people we deal with at Etech probably score them an 8 or 9, because you can always get better. Don't ever believe anybody is perfect. In the
Yeah.
industry itself, with the people we talk to, it's probably like a 3. And
Oh, wow.
the reason that is we still run into people daily that aren't using conversational analytics. They're still
Okay.
listening to 3 calls, 2 calls. So let's just call it a handful of calls per agent per month. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, you're making all your decisions on biased information, because it's not even a valid statistical sample size to make decisions. And it's
Okay.
amazing how I still see people and hear people saying, yeah, we have a quality team. They're listening to a couple calls. I just don't think that's where the market should be, if that helps.
Makes sense. No, that really makes sense. So you're suggesting that large part of the market, uh, in this point in the time today as well, is really just doing handful of call quality and not really using or anything for that matter to be able to do better on that top side, right? That's my logic.
Yeah, correct. So the story is this. So even when I lived in India, speech
Mm-hmm.
analytics wasn't really big back then. But
Yeah,
even
yeah,
back then, eTech took an effort to make sure quality was important. Especially, we're in a new country, we're new people, new.
yeah,
We said, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way.
yeah.
So one of our first initiatives was to create a quality team that would do more than less than 1% of your calls. So we hired 100 people roughly. And all they did was listen to calls all day long and created actionable items from it, like what you could have done, what you did well, what you could do better, etc. And back then it was probably 5% maybe of the call volume. And the more people they're not even listening to that. And then we'll talk about later is when speech came in and how it really transformed where you're at today.
Yeah. So it seems to me that even back then you were doing better than the industry average for sure.
Correct.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Now that you've told me about the overall instance of how do you see the quality monitoring side, my question to you would be, Jim, is that one of the major ways to improve the quality monitoring, and I'll not say it's the only way, is obviously using speech analytics or conversational analytics, right?
Yes.
For sure. But speech analytics and conversation analytics has been in the industry for last five years roughly, in a good stage as well. The adoption is really low still at this point in time after half of a decade, right? What do you think is a major factor where the adoption is not going up as crazy as it should be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the opportunities, and Etech is software agnostic. So a lot of people that we speak to in the industry will say, who's the best? Well, there really is no best. What are you trying to accomplish, number one? So setting your goal. What is your goal? And then understanding that. I think the reason the adoption rate isn't as widespread as we would think is I think people just don't know how it works. Because if you talk to companies will basically tell you, and I remember I talked to the CEO of a major player in the industry in speech analytics. And unfortunately for him, since I came from operations, he was already at a disadvantage because I understand ops. And I'll never forget this. He says, how many people do you have listening to calls? I said, hundreds. And he says, I'm going to replace them all. And I think that's a myth. That's a fallacy because I think people who are selling the technology say they're going to replace all their people. That's not true. Because the machine, as you know, being in this space, is only as smart as the engineer who programmed it, the scientist who takes the data and makes it actionable, and the analyst who tells you all about what's going on. So I think the adoption rate where people try to sell it, they say it's going to replace everything, replace people, and I think it's the farthest from the truth. It reduces people for sure. However, you still need that human intelligence to take those insights and understand how to apply them to the business to actually drive that performance. So I think people are scared, number one. Number two, I think anybody who's telling us we're going to replace all your people, because we believe in this culture of people are the most important asset we ever have. So I think that kind of turns some people off. And then I think three is just they're scared because they don't know what they don't know. And as you know, these machines need a data engineer, data scientist, data analyst to really truly harness the power of AI. And most contact centers don't have a closet of people just sitting around doing nothing. So it's not like you can take a person who listened to calls from day one and turn them into an engineer or a scientist. It takes training. So that's what I believe is the big opportunity of why the adoption rate is so low. The other part of the adoption rate, I think people think that you have to spend millions of dollars to adopt, which isn't true. Because if you find the right partner in an analytics or conversational analytics partner who's willing to do a pilot or a proof of value or a proof of concept to make sure it works, I think that's easier to go to market. And I know a lot of the speech companies are all about all the volume, all the customers, all the interactions. And I think sometimes that's hard to get budget for millions of dollars if you have no proof that it's going to work.
It does actually, and then I'm amazed by the nuances of what you have been able to provide us, right? We sort of go through them on a daily basis when we talk to our customers. And one thing, that we try to make it upfront very clear to anyone that we speak to, that hey, you don't look at this tool as something that can replace your people, right? You look at this thing as something that can improve their efficiency by a huge margin or a huge volume that way. But you'll still need that human intelligence to come into picture at the right areas so you can drive better ROI for your business, right? And that's when that I have at least personally seen sticking with them, right? Just the realization that the person who's speaking to you really knows the nuance of it, understands the technology can't replace people, that definitely gets them into confidence. But extending this question further, right? um, do you see, like let's talk about the geographies, right? And let's talk about US as a geography for that matter, right? Or outside India basically. Do you see that the people are problem aware? Are they really aware that only looking into handful of conversations from the agent and then doing call quality monitoring on top of it, and then taking strategic decisions on top of it, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Are they really even aware about the problem statement, would you say, in your experience?
I think people are aware of the problem statement in the US. And I think a lot of people, by the way, use speech analytics, but aren't seeing the ROI. It's almost like a checkbox, right? So they're doing the quality, they're using the analytics to check the box to make sure I was compliant or that we did this or that. And I think the problem is a lot of people don't understand, if you don't have those data engineers and scientists and analysts, the true harness of the tech stack of what it could produce. And you know this, your company's very good at what it does. So think about voice of customer sentiment, right?
Yeah.
One thing I speak about all the time is when people say, well, I'm using surveys. Well, let's be honest and talk about the survey. What's your response rate? 4% if you're lucky?
Yeah.
We know using these tools like Convin, right, and other tools that we do use, we know that we can predict what that sentiment is by listening to the entire interaction and giving you a promoter, a detractor, or a neutral without sending a survey. But I don't think the companies that sell the technologies, and not all, right, I don't think they really explain what you can do with it or even teach what you can do with it. I think a lot of, like, because I've talked to people in the industry who've used speech analytics for 2 years because they were under contract, and then they fire them and they stop using it because they haven't seen the value. And that value is hard to do unless you have the domain expertise to explain it. Because most salespeople, and myself included, I'm a sales guy by trade, but most salespeople are selling a product and a feature, where an analyst or someone like you, as the CEO of the company, you get it. We teach the value of deploying, how to deploy, and how to see the true ROI from that. As an example, one of our customers came to me and told me, analyze these calls and let me know what you see, before he was getting into speech. So I went in with my teams and we looked at 135,000 interactions. And the first thing, and that was in a month's worth of calls. And the first thing we saw was, and it was a sales deployment, hardly anybody was asking for the sale. So you and I know, as running sales teams, like, that's rule number one, right? Ask for the sale, right? Ask for the order, get the commitment. And I went to him with this first piece of data. And he came to me, he says, well, that's just crap stuff. He says, you're required, if you're on my program, to ask for the sale. I said, really? He's like, yeah. I said, well, your best vendor is doing it 60% of the time. And your worst vendor is doing it 20% of the time. And that's what opened up his eyes, because his process, his policy was ask for the sale on every call. And unless you're looking at large data sets, to what we said in the beginning, if you're listening to 3, 4, 5 handful of calls, you're never going to get to the true measurement. And we showed him, hey, listen, If we just asked for the sale, did nothing else, no other behavior changes yet, in which we do, but let's just talk about this one. Just by forcing them to ask for the sale on every call, or 85% of the calls, it's about a $500,000 in incremental revenue. And that's where the light bulb goes off specifically on those stories. And by the way, there's other behaviors. We know, as you know, in this space, the most effective rebuttals. Training tells you the rebuttal based on a book, based on what they think. The data shows you the most effective that are working. So those are the type of things I think where people don't get it yet, or some people get it and just some people don't know how to act on it.
Makes sense. And I think I agree with what you're saying, right? So you're suggesting largely that a lot of people are problem aware, at least, right? They understand that quality monitoring, as of now in its current form that they're doing, is probably not the optimum way. Speech analytics is one of the ways to help it improve, right? And you also pointed out why the adoption is less. My question to you here, which is probably an extension of what we have been talking, is do you really think that high pricing, fear of things falling out and not working for someone who's a decision maker in a company, right? And I'll talk it from two perspectives, from the call center or contact center perspective and from the company perspective as well, both ways, right? Do you think high pricing, fear of commitment, being on the wrong side of deployment might be those kind of things that they're really worried about? And that's why they say, hey, look, what's going on? Let's go with it and not change the current motion.
I do. I believe that the high cost of adoption, of not knowing what you're going to get, because remember, if you're the tech guy, the CTO, for an example, at a company, and you're going to go spend, let's just call it $100,000 for sake of argument, you still got to prove what that $100,000 brought back to you. And it's hard to know that. It's a big risk. That's why best demonstrated practices, in our opinion, is a proof of value, proof of concept, which I know a lot of companies offer. But again, I go back to the original. When speech was first brought to Etech, the first and foremost thing they all said, how many agents do you have? It's irrelevant, right? That's not the question you should be asking me. Because if you want to talk about a proof of value, let's pick one campaign, one program, 25 agents, and let's see if what you tell me works. And I remember talking to the CEO of this speech company. And when he heard Etech had 3,600 agents, he did an ROI based on how much money he's going to save us on those 3,600 agents with really no operational expertise, by the way. So not knowing that, they look at those big numbers. And fortunately, him and I became friends, and we actually did one program. I think it was like 50 agents, and it proved itself. And then he earned the right to get into other parts of the business. But in my experience, most people are trying to get the big ticket. How many agents do you have? Let's talk about them all. No.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a subset and see if it works. Because if I was in the sales part of it, trying to sell a CTO or a CEO or a finance guy, they want to see their ROI. So let's just take a subset, let's prove it works, and then let's grow from there. And unfortunately, a lot of tech companies look for the big, in my opinion, they look for the big sale versus working and building a relationship, improving the model. So I think that adoption is hard because it's, listen, if I had to go to our board or my president and say, listen, I want to spend $400,000 on speech analytics. What's my return on investment? Well, I'm not sure, but they're telling me it's going to work. It's a hard sale.
Makes sense. No, I think I agree with that. Let's say that, you get to that part where this becomes a necessity, right? Over the period in time, people are willing to sort of spend. What do you think? How does the business dynamic work? For example, you are leading a contact center setup. You have the power of, let's say, speech analytics, right? There is a customer that you serve, and you will obviously tell them that, hey, look, this is something that we can do. Now, obviously, there is a cost associated to it, right? The cost, and it has to be borne by someone, either you or the client that you have. In your experience, have you seen the clients to be really open about taking up that cost because they really value what can come out of the speech analytics, how they can really benefit from it? Or do you see that that part of the whole process is still very, very, unhealthy? It's not something which is very, very clearly defined. And that also is the cause of problem about adoption.
Yeah, so great question. So Etech is a contact center, and we also have analytics as a standalone business. So to answer your question, Etech is not the cheapest contact center in the business. A lot of people we talk to always say you're $2 or $3 more, or whatever the number is, than your competitors. What we do is we show actual output from our speech engines and the insights beyond agent performance, which, by the way, agent performance is important. So when they hire the contact center is responsible for quality of the agent. That should be our cost, right? We should bear that cost, and we agree 100%. But when you could show them voice of customer sentiment, right? We break it into 3 categories: people, processes, and technology. If we can show you how we can improve the people, we're doing that. You're right. That should be on us. However, by using analytics, if I can show you process improvements, is that beneficial to you? And if we can show technology advancements, is that beneficial to you? 90% of the customers we speak to are very interested in that. Competitive mentions, as an example, in speech, we can get that in 2 seconds. Would it be valuable for you, Mr. Customer, if we were able to show you not only what the agent did well, but what your customer said about your competitors, the offers, the pricing, the process? That's gold. And yes, it is worth the money. And to your point, roughly 90% of the people we speak to are very interested in getting, we call it business intelligence beyond agents. And that's definitely of value and will pay for it. It has to be explained and shown the value of what you're going to get, not just say, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of BI data. Because anybody can get that through Tableau, and all the other things that everybody uses, Tableau and Power BI, and that's not really analytics. That's reporting. Analytics is who, what, why, where, when it happened, and how to fix it.
That really makes sense, actually. What you're suggesting is that if you're using any part of speech analytics for your own agent improvement, you bear that cost as a company.
Correct.
Right? But then the second part of it, which can really be very, very useful for the customer, is learning from their own customers what they are talking about, and then probably making or taking better strategic calls over the period of time.
Absolutely. And I think that's some of the things that people, I don't want to say they miss it, because that's not fair. I think the opportunity is just the education, and that's where I talk about domain expertise. No disrespect to anybody on this call that's listening from IT, but one of the scenarios I say is, when's the last time the IT guy listened to a call or took a call? Rarely do I ever hear clients tell me that, but typically these decisions in tech stacks are made by CTOs and technology people. I've always said you really need, and what we do at Etech, which is best, is we bring all the departments in: marketing, training, obviously IT, security. And now when you have a huge population of people that know different parts of the business, and truly when you work as a team, you can actually uncover a lot of different things, because technology guys are great. IT solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. But the question I always ask is this the problem that ops is having now? Right?
Makes sense.
That's pretty much how I look at it.
Makes sense. In this whole setup, Jim, which we talked about right now, and it seems like a very logical approach to making sure that adoption is not a problem for those people, and the cost is also borne by them because they're getting value out of it. Who defines the problem statement? Because you are running the show, are you defining the problem statement? Do you say that, hey, look, this is what we think you should be improving? Or you see a collaborative effort largely coming in from the businesses as well, and they taking very active participation and say, hey, look, this is a problem that we have. Do you think we can find some insight to this problem using speech analytics, and could you help us in some way? How have you seen the flow of problem and the solutions?
Yeah, great question. So I think it has to be collaborative. We come from a trusted advisor relationship, which basically means that what we'll do in a deployment is we'll go to the company and say, name 3 things that keeps you up at night, or what is your perception of what's not working well? Just give me 3. They give us those 3. Our analysts, scientists, and engineers go in, ingest 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 interactions. We obviously build the categories, as you're familiar how the tech works, and we'll build 150 to 200 different categories. We'll come back with their 3 problem statements and solutions for those. In addition, we'll add 5 or 6 of our own that we've observed based on our experience in the industry. And when you do that, you've solved their problem, the 3 they think. And by the way, sometimes they give us 3 things that they think are a problem, like compliance is an easy one. People say, like, I'm up at night all day long because I'm afraid they're not using a recording statement for a simple compliance example. And what we found is actually 94% of your people are doing it right. You're scared because you're listening to 3, 4, and you're not sure. You heard the 1 or 2 that weren't done, or you remember the 1 or 2 lawsuits that were against you. You don't remember that 90% of the time it's actually being done effectively, right? So so that's one. And then the other things, you've earned the right to actually go in and give them advice on other opportunities like process improvements. Sometimes, we'll hear things like channel switching is big in our environment, as you know. The reason I'm calling your call center is I was on your website and I was trying to do this and I couldn't. That's a channel switch. And what is a typical quality manager? What are they doing? They're listening to what the agent did on the phone. Did they take care of the problem? And they score them really good. But that's really not the root cause. The root cause is there's something wrong with the website. And you're never going to know that with a traditional quality program because there's nowhere on a quality form that says this was channel switching, right? So that's where you earn the right to do process improvements. Hey, this happened 18% of the time yesterday.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with the website.
Yeah. Makes sense. And obviously how deep you can take with the whole speech analytics part, right? Is you can really talk about sentiment, the reasons why they are calling you up, what sentiment is prevailing on those reasons when they call you up, and are your agents doing right on those reasons when they call you up? So identifying the coaching opportunities, improving, and then getting the insights from the customers. Very true.
Yeah.
One major part of this whole process, and when we talk about implementation of, let's say, or using technology, specifically AI, right, in the whole quality monitoring part, do you see that it still needs to be sampled, or you are more of on the favor of 100% analytics, or you still see that, hey, look, 100% analytics is too much to stretch. Why not start with 10%, 15%? Still better than 2% that you're doing today manually. What side do you lean on?
So great question. I lean on all, because here's what we look at. So if you're listening to less than 1% today, the first thing, our best demonstrated practice is drop in 70 to 100% of the calls for a month. Month 1. Now that's going to give us a baseline to where you're actually at. And then it allows you to go in and target coach. Do I believe that you need 100% ingestion for the rest of your life? Absolutely not. But you do need a baseline, right? So a lot of customers will come to us who've never used speech, never used it, and says, listen, I just want a baseline. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll ingest, 100,000 phone calls. Like the example I gave you with the 135,000. You ingest a batch of calls. You basically identify all the opportunities and get it going. You give it back to them to go out and coach and develop those people for a month. You come back month 2. Now, so that was month 1. Month 2, you give them to go fix the problems. You come back month 3, you put another huge batch of calls in again, and then show the trending. Now you've got a good data set. And to answer your question, I think a valid statistical sample size is anywhere between 30 and 50%. You'll catch it when there's opportunities because they'll come to the top. but I'm not a firm believer that you need 100% all the time if things are running well. The one exception I will give to you is if you're doing anything compliance related and it's a risk of like a $10,000 fine every time something happens, then by all means you need to be just 100% all the time, just to protect your ROI there. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I think I love that part where you were able to specifically say that, hey, look, it's all about understanding what is working and what is not working, right? Which is creating that baseline. And once you're able to create that baseline, you can really pick and choose what you want to solve, how much you want to solve, when, and that's where the sampling and everything else can come into picture.
Yeah, and I think one of the opportunities, a lot of the tech companies, because every time they come to me for renewals, right? And we're saying, it's time to renew. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? We fixed a lot of our problems last year. So I'm going to renew, but I'm going to do about, 20% less than I did last year. Well, does it make sense? Well, yeah, it does, because the tool works. We've improved the processes and we're fixing the problems. So it absolutely makes sense. But a lot of times the tech companies, they're all, and you know this, they're all about the renewal. Yeah. They're all about growth. They're all about adding more, right? But if your processes work and you're showing the improvements, actually you can use less of the speech.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense actually. And though it will not be like the tech companies will not be very happy, including me, about this. But yes, I do get the sense.
Yeah, so
like if you're improving on the process side.
Here's what I tell the tech companies, right? Because we're all the same, right? So what I would tell the tech companies, you're absolutely right. The way we want to keep our renewals at the same rate or increasing is Etech needs to sell more business. You need to sell me customers who aren't using a good call center. Because the more growth you have, the more employees you add. Yes, you are 100% correct.
Sure. Makes sense. One of the last questions that I want to put off, with all of this discussion that we have done so far, and what do you think is the optimum balance of how technology, or let's say AI, speech analytics for that matter, should work with human intervention, right? And one, the optimum balance, and second, what should that process look like for optimum success? The reason I'm asking you this from you, because I do understand that you have seen this for multiple clients all the time, all over it again, multiple times. So you would be able to help us understand that part.
Yeah, so great question. So question one would be something to the effect that I don't believe any speech engine, and you might not know what this is, but there's a guy, Ron Popeil, who had the rotisserie. If you've seen the commercials in America, which some of your audience would, it's set it and forget it. I think that's the biggest lie in the industry. I think when you deploy speech analytics, it's a machine. It needs to be fine-tuned. It needs to learn. Even machine learning is being learned by a human being coding the machine. So I think phase one for us is always about, let's go in and ingest. However, human intelligence has to go in and listen to those calls, some of them, a sample set, and make sure the machine is fine-tuned and hitting the categories correctly, right? And that's a small handful of maybe 5 to 7 analysts that are going to do that for about 30 days. And now it's tuned. And we've inspected it, we've checked it for understanding, and checked to make sure the output is coming correctly. Then in month 2, month 3, and month 4, it turns it to be like 1 or 2 analysts who are constantly checking humanly to make sure that the categories are hitting, everything's accurate. And to answer your last question, I believe one analyst could probably manage about a customer size of about 250 agents. So for every 200, 250 agents, you need an analyst. And what that analyst is doing is part of his day is making sure that the tuning is correct, but part of his day is to be capturing insights from the machine that maybe the ops person wouldn't pick up on, like a bad sentiment for a process or a channel switch. So you always will need people. Do you need a lot? No, most of our deployments, even where we have deployments where it's like 1,000 agents, they have about 5 analysts on it in the machine. So humans will never go away, but you don't need as many. Did I answer that correctly for you?
Yes, I have an extension question though to that.
Sure.
You mentioned that there will be, let's say, one agent dedicated to about 200, 250 odd agents out there, right? Just about the quality analysis part of it. What should be the detailed role of that agent? Is the agent trying to look into the areas where these agents, like the quality analysis agent, is they trying to look into the areas where the other people have not done good, and then they try to go and give them feedback? Because I am just looking through it and saying it might be a very tough process to do that. So what do you expect that one particular agent to do with these 200 other agents
Yeah,
to
so
handle?
great question. So we believe at Etech that our coaches, our frontline leaders, should spend
Mhm.
85% of their time coaching. So what the analyst does is takes the analytics and
Mhm.
basically makes a packet out of it. So every day our coaches get who to coach, what to coach, and the coaching tools to help coach the person. So now 85% of their time is being coaching, where some call centers have the coach pulling calls, analyzing data, spending spreadsheets, we just don't believe in that method. We believe that if you have an analyst to tell you who to coach, what to coach, how to coach, it makes it easier. And to answer your second part of the question, that person's looking at trending. So it's not about what happened yesterday. So we're an analyst, right? So as an analyst, let's look at the data over 30 days. And by the way, Ashish, we're showing your trending is going up. Good job. However, geez, wait a minute, we're giving the feedback every day and he's flatlined. He's still not getting any better. So that analyst is going to go to the coach and say, hey, coach, Ashish needs a little bit of help on these particular behaviors that don't seem to be tracking like everybody else is. And that's really what an analyst does. They look at data in the big picture and be able to break it down into bite-sized nuggets so you're not being overwhelmed as a coach. Does that answer your question? That's how that analyst
Perfect.
does.
Yeah, no, that's really perfect. I think having that separate position as being someone as analyst, then someone who's coaching, and they being able to get all these insights from the analyst to be able to dedicate their time in the right possible way, that's really going to help.
Yeah, so what
What do
Etech
you?
has created to help you even take it to one step further, which is pretty cool, we created an algorithm in the machine that would actually give us the effectiveness of the
Mhm.
coaching, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
oh yeah, I'm coaching Ashish every day. He's doing great. Really? Not really, because we're scoring you a B because he's not really getting in these 2 or 3 critical behaviors that are needed. And that's really what, because and actually reiterate what you said, an analyst is a third party. He has no he has no skin in the game other to be an analyst. An
yeah,
analyst just tells the story. What's the data telling me? The coach might be saying, I'm coaching, I'm coaching, I'm coaching. The data's
yeah,
telling me a different story.
yeah, yeah. No, that's very interesting actually. One last question that I would, oh, sorry, I mean, a couple of questions before
No
we wrap up, right?
worries.
Because it's coming up on our mind and it's important. Um, so this means that the setup you are suggesting should look like a contact center having one analyst for every 200, 250 people using, let's say, a speech analytics solution, then having coaches separately, right?
Yes.
How many coaches, or what is the ratio of the coaches that you suggest for
Yeah, great.
optimum experience?
Yeah, great question. So in our experience, we run either 15 to 1 or 10 to 1. So for every 10 agents or 15 agents, there's one coach. And so we call them coaches because we don't believe in manager supervisors. It's just a word because everybody
Mm-hmm.
needs a coach. The greatest people
Yeah,
in the world need coaches. That's why we've chosen that
yeah.
word. But
Mm-hmm.
depending on the complexity of the operation, 15 to 1 is the standard across the industry. Some people run 18 to 1, but 15 to 1 is good.
15 to 1 is what you're suggesting. Makes sense. The last part, which I have seen a lot of people struggling, and it's also one of the reasons why I have seen people not being able to trust the solutions really well out there, are the harder part of the problem statement. So let me explain this. Any quality monitoring process would usually contain three buckets, and they may contain more, but three buckets I have seen usually. The first bucket would be pitch adherence. What are they speaking on the call? What has been decided? They should revolve around that part. They should cover most important parts and all that. That's one part. The second part is probably information benchmarking. Are they really giving the correct information or the wrong one, right? That's I have seen to be a very important second part. The third bucket I've seen to be very important during all of these processes is process adherence, right? Did they, after the call, did they really mark the lead as XYZ? Did they go to CRM? Did they do this and this and this after the call has been done, or during the call it was done or not, right? If you have more buckets in mind, you can really add Jim. But the question here is, we have seen speech analytics solution to be master at the first bucket, but struggling generally at the bucket 2 and bucket 3. It's really hard to do all of that stuff, right? It takes in a lot of information, a lot of benchmarking, knowledge repository. Still, you can't cover the dynamic information, and all of those things come into picture, right? Have you seen people not adopting the solution for this one particular reason? And then how do you really handle it in your cases?
Yeah, so I've seen people not adopt to it because of the note. Let's talk about notes taking. I get that one. Mm-hmm. I have customers that do that. So here's how we've converted to that. So as an example, if we go back to our original where it's 1% of the calls, I'm listening to, let's just take one agent as an example. Let's say 8 calls. I'm listening to 8 calls. I'm opening up the screen recording system, which they have, to make sure the guy typed in the notes, right? So I'm listening to let's just call it a 10-minute call. I'm listening to a 10-minute call. I'm looking at the screen at the same time, and I'm validating that he did all that. Okay? Yeah, so I'm doing this on 10. So what he said is, if you deploy speech analytics, now you can take that one person, take that one part of the call, which we can do, which is that 30 seconds where he's typing his notes. This one person that used to listen to a 10-minute call can now validate the notes, because there's really no tech that I'm aware of yet that can actually read it all and make sure it's all done. So it's still going to take you a minute, but this person now can do 10 in a minute. So in 10 minutes, he can look at 10 of those sections of the call and the screen recording versus listening to a 10-minute call. That's how we've overcome that. But I think that's what you're asking me. But yeah, that's definitely a hard one, because everybody's interested in, well, you don't understand. We have to enter this in the CRM. But you're only doing it today less than 1% of the time. And that person is doing both. Yes. What if we took all of the behavior stuff off their plate and focused only on the CRM piece and that 1 minute part of the call that they did the wrap up, and that person can do 10 times more than he was an hour before? That's the only way I've seen it successful, if that helps.
Makes sense. No, that helps. And I think obviously over the period in time, the acceptance to that will increase. Like, people will try to understand all of this, and I'm hopeful the acceptance increases. But amazing, Jim. It has been a breeze. Like, I didn't even notice how 45 minutes went by.
Oh, wow. You're right. It's been great.
Yeah. Would be loving to have you again, probably some other time regarding some other topic, but it was great having you on Convin Conversations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ashish. I look forward to meeting you next time I come to India.
Sure, definitely. Have a good day.